Hello and welcome back to my small little library. First and foremost, the obvious, I colored my hair. I wasn't the biggest fan of the pink and I've gone back to something darker, a little bit more in season I think. But yeah, one of my favorite hair colors on me. But yeah, I tend to switch it up every few months, so don't worry, they're gonna come other hair colors if you don't like this one. Secondly, today I'm gonna do my first review video. I never told about it on here, but I do have an Instagram account where I do short book reviews of the books I've read. Yeah, I thought why not do a little bit of book reviews on my YouTube channel to mix the content up a little bit, and also sometimes I really want to talk about books but I don't really have someone to talk to about them. So I thought, why not do it like this, so we can share all our ideas about the books and everything we thought was good or wasn't as good about a book on here, and yeah, why not, right? The first book I'm gonna do this with is Pet Sematary, because I actually finished it yesterday and I'm really happy about it, and I do hope you are prepared for spoilers, because there are gonna be spoilers here, obviously. First of all, what is it about? If you don't know it already, I mean, there are two films out there. The older one, which is, as I'm told, more accurate, and the second one, the newer one, which I was told wasn't as good. And yeah, then you have the book. So pretty much might be that you know the story, but if you don't know the story, we have a family of four. There's Louis, our main character, and from whom the perspective is most of the time. Then you have Rachel, his wife, and then you have Ellie, his daughter, who is 5 or 6, and Gage, their smallest one, who is 2, I think, or 1 to 2 in the book. It spends a little bit of time. And they actually move across country, and they move to this, to Maine, from Chicago, and Louis actually is a doctor and he works at the university. And the house is really nice that they move into, and they have like a direct access to the woods behind their house. But the only thing that the location isn't as great is that there is a street, and the street is used by trucks a lot of the time. And so they move in, they meet the neighbors, and the neighbors across the street are called Judd and Norma. And Judd actually, they get to know each other a little bit better in the rest of the book, and they actually do get to be friends. But even at the beginning, Judd like warns him that like the street is really dangerous and stuff. Oh, and also they have a cat named Winston Church actually, but they call him Church. And yeah, so at the beginning everything is fine. Lucy's first work day doesn't go great because there's someone who gets run over by a car and he dies. Yeah, it isn't the nicest thing. And also they visit the pet cemetery that is behind their house a little bit through the forest, and Judd actually takes them there and shows it to them, and it's just a place where kids over the years, yeah, there are animals that died, and it's like not an official cemetery but like made by the kids. When the college student that dies on Louis's first day actually comes back to him in a dream and brings him to the pet cemetery and kind of warns him that it's dangerous behind the pet cemetery and stuff like that. And you get like the feeling that something's wrong with it. Then as the story progresses, everything is fine, and they do have their struggles. Rachel, for example, doesn't like to talk about death, which like in a horror book is kind of like bad for you, actually. But yeah. But other than that, everything is fine, and for Thanksgiving, Rachel and the kids travel to their grandparents, to Rachel's parents, who do not really like Louis, and so Louis stays at the house. And whilst they are away, Church actually gets run over in the street, and Judd shows him for the first time what lies behind the Pet Sematary. And actually Church comes back from the dead, and he isn't really himself anymore, but he's fine enough so that it doesn't really matter. He does stink, and he isn't really like a graceful cat anymore, but yeah, his family accepts it as being Church because he doesn't tell his daughter, who really loves the cat, that Church actually dies. So they don't know that he died. Yeah, after that, the place behind the Pet Sematary kind of has like this force, and it grows stronger whenever somebody buries someone there, and it actually takes a hold of Louis. And when the inevitable happens and Gage actually gets hit by a truck on the same road sometime later, yeah, you can think what happens, right? He steals the body, he makes his wife go to the grandparents. He steals the body of Gage and brings him to the Pet Sematary, and he comes back, but he isn't really himself, and he starts killing people. And yeah, Louis can't really deal with that, and actually Rachel comes back before all of it is over because she has like a bad feeling, and Ellie is also having dreams and nightmares to warn about the situation. But yeah, she can't really make her parents listen any more than they do, and so Rachel comes back, and Gage actually kills Judd and Rachel. And as Louis sees it, his only reaction is like, oh my god, this has gone terribly out of hand, but at the same time the cemetery still has his force, and it's so strong that he can't really cope with it, and so he actually goes ahead, kills Church and Gage, takes his wife and buries her in the cemetery so that she can come back. And he makes a fire in Judd's house so that all the evidence of what happened is destroyed, and he can basically live a happy life with his wife. And yeah, the book just stops when his wife comes back. That is the end. And yeah, so what did I think of the book? I actually gave it 5 stars. I loved it. If you've been here before, I've talked about it in my TBR video that I actually tried to read that when I was a teen, and I couldn't get through it, like at like 12, 13. I couldn't get through it, and so I didn't read it until now. I'm now 27, about to turn 28, so it took me a really long time to get back to it. And I'm kind of sad that I waited this long, because it's an incredibly good book. It's less horror than I would have thought, because I remembered that I was kind of really creeped out from the book, and I didn't read past the cat coming back, past Churchill coming back. And that is actually like roughly before half of the book. So I haven't read more than half of the book before, and this time around Church coming back wasn't as scary. I didn't think it was that like, yeah, it just wasn't that incredibly scary. And the end point where Gage comes back and stuff, it's really creepy, and it's really well done, but it's less horror than I would have thought, because it's only like the last roughly 70 pages, and the book has, at least my edition has, I think 470 pages. So 70 pages isn't really much, you know. I think where the book really shines is with the family dynamic, just how realistic the family is. Because you don't have like this picture perfect family who get to a house and then everything starts to go wrong. No, they have history and they have trauma, and he doesn't like her parents. Her parents don't really like him because they think he's a moocher, and which is like a dumb thing to think, but they do think that, and Rachel has her little sister as baggage because her little sister had a spinal condition which made her grow stiffer and stiffer and ever more painful, and her parents actually hid her in a back room, and Rachel had to care for her sister as well, and her sister turned really, really nasty with time just because of pain and not being able to live her life, and she died really young. And so Rachel has a lot of baggage in that point, and it's always a point of, oh, I don't want to tell Rachel this, or I'm gonna have to tell her in a different way, or hopefully Rachel doesn't hear this. And Rachel also responds with like really, really like trauma responses where you're like, oh yeah, that is how that is. And so you have this really, it's a nice family, but it's like a realistic family, and I don't know, somehow I think that's actually missing in a lot of books where you don't have the most realistic family dynamics. And it stood out so much, and I was so sad for so much of this book, just because there's so much trauma in this book. And that doesn't even include the horror, because like your cat dying is horrendous. My parents and as kids we had 2 cats, and one of them died way too young, and it was a really horrific thing to go through. So I really feel for it, for example. Or Norma, Judd's wife, actually has a heart attack fairly early on, and the first one she lives through, but the second one she dies, and it's all a really, really sad thing, because you get to a little bit of like the feeling that Judd and Norma are like a second pair of grandparents that these kids have. And I, for one, grew up with like having older people living in the building in front of the house from my parents, and they were actually as well like a third pair of grandparents for myself. And so there were a lot of points where I could see myself in the story, and that made the book all that much harder to read and all that much sadder because of everything and all of the trauma. I mean, even with Rachel's sister being this terminally ill child that doesn't have a lot of like joy in her life, and the whole thing that Rachel can't even talk about it at the beginning, and then later on the trauma comes to the surface and she starts to talk about it, and Lewis's reaction to that was so good and so incredibly well written. I mean, I enjoy a lot of Stephen King's books, but I feel like sometimes he can be like really just like pushing through without the really, really small details in some of his books. But in this one, for example, it's just chef's kiss. It's incredible. And so, to be honest, do I think that it's the greatest horror book? No, because for one, it kind of has that place in my heart, and which also written by Stephen King, but it was way more horrible. And I don't think the horror part is like the best part of the book here. I think the best part of the book is like the whole atmosphere, that you have this normal family that has a lot of hiccups and sadness that kind of like floats around because of things happening, and it always gets better, and then it gets worse again, and it gets better, and then the horror comes out. And yeah, it's so well fitting, and it made me read the book really, really fast in the end, which I wouldn't have thought, because it was kind of like, it didn't scar me when I read it the first time, but I was really afraid of the church thing. I don't really even know why. I can't remember why I felt so scared by the book. But it's nice to see that I was probably more overwhelmed with the emotions of the book back then, because I'm still working on processing emotions the best way, and I think back then I wasn't really mature enough to understand all the emotions in this book. Now that I'm older, there's so much you can relate to in the book, and it makes a really, really great reading experience, at least for me. So yeah. I don't really know what else to say. How do you do book reviews, right? What this book has also taught me is I think I'm gonna have to start kind of like putting sticky notes in the books and like marking sections and stuff, because at some points I wanted to tell my husband about it because he already he read the book and he also watched both films, so and I kept forgetting where the things are or like what the wording was and stuff, so I think I might have to start doing that. I don't know how best to do that yet without like disturbing my reading flow. But yeah, this one actually inspired me to do so. And I also think the version is quite pretty. This is sort of like one of these sets where they all have the same spine and having church on the cover. It's actually quite cool. I was so sad. I mean, I knew what happened to the cat beforehand because like you can't really not know the story. Like it's so much out there and it's so old by this point that I mean, you probably have heard how the story goes, but I was just so sad when that happened to the cat. And yeah, can't even like really comprehend your pet just changing that much and how disappointed the little girl had to be. Yeah, so coming now to the films, I really want to watch the older one. There are some differences, as for example, my husband was like, when I told him that I have just read the whole Gage situation when he killed Judd, he was like, oh yeah, was it like that he cut the Achilles tendon in his foot and so Judd fell, and I was like, no, in the book he actually, Church actually trips Judd and then Gage can kind of like jump on his head and stab him with a knife or a scalpel from his father's bag. And so I was like, okay, there are definitely differences how they did things in the film, but I do think that the first film is supposed to be quite true to the story. Now the second, more modern film, for some reason, I have no idea why they would do that, they switched Gage and Ellie. So they made Ellie die, I assume in the road, but I don't know. And they made Gage live. And I personally think that that doesn't have the same impact than Gage dying. Because I do think Gage being like the youngest child, and for him a lot of things are games, and he doesn't really understand the road and stuff like that, I think that is much more hard-hitting than the little girl dying that is already old enough to go to school and to know the rules, and she can much more heavily mourn her brother, which she does a lot in the book, and she also has the visions of her dad dying, of her brother dying and stuff, because something is trying to warn her. And I don't think that you can really convey that through Gage being only 2, you know? So I probably will never watch the newer one because I just don't think that makes sense. But I will try. I mean, I'm horrible at watching horror films. I don't really enjoy it, but I will probably try and watch the film just to see the difference between the book and the film. I really like to read the books first and then watch the films to really see the difference in them and if it makes sense, the differences that were made in films, but because not everything that works in a book works in a film, let's be honest. But yeah, a lot of the book also plays out in the heads of people. Like, you do have different perspectives, but the main perspective is Lewis, and then you have like a small little tidbit of Ellie, a small little tidbit of Rachel, a small little tidbit of Judd, just like what they're doing in the parallel to Lewis. And so a lot of things in the book are conveyed through thoughts, because they don't, as I said, Lewis don't always tell his wife what he thinks, just because, you know, it will upset her and he doesn't want to upset her at those points. And so yeah, I would like to see the difference and how different the impact is. I'm assuming that the film is much more horror than the book, because it is a horror film, and I mean, probably for a movie you need more horror aspects. But yeah, I love the book for the realistic look at a family and for making it just really, really creepy for being so realistic and relatable. And yeah, 5 stars. Really happy I've read it, and yeah, next Stephen King book to come is Fairy Tale, which I'm halfway through, so shouldn't take that long. I hope you enjoyed my first book review. Please leave me suggestions down below what I can do better. I know that I'm a little bit of a scatterbrain at times, and so yeah, just tell me what I can do better so I can make the video more enjoyable. And yeah, if you liked the video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe to my channel if you would be so nice. And yeah, have a great day, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.